workshop meeting of the Council Bluffs Community School District Board of Directors. Mr. Wilson, please call the roll.
Dr. Algress.
Present.
Mr. Kazire.
Present.
Mr. Arthur.
Here.
Ms. Shudak.
Here.
Ms. Johnson.
Here.
Ms. Hardiman.
Present.
Mr. LaFurla.
Present. Next, please join me, if you will, in a moment of silence, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Next, we have approval of the agenda. Is there a motion?
Move approval of our agenda as presented.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. And our agenda has been approved. Now we have approval of the minutes of the work session and regular business meetings of September 28th, 2021. Is there a motion?
Move to approve the minutes from the work session and regular business meetings of September 28th, 2021.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. And the motion carries. Next up is public participation. We did have two members request to speak at the meeting tonight. Just a reminder to members of the audience and those planning to speak tonight to please adhere to our policy regarding public participation. And those individuals both will have 5 minutes to speak to the board. And first, I will call up Amy Foster. And Amy, we have your name and address on the phone, so you don't need to state those
Great.
into the microphone if you don't want to do that.
Thank you. Amy Foster, AMMIE. This evening, I would like to continue our discussion about the mass expectations in our schools. School districts across the state of Iowa and across this country have the right and the ability to choose whether or not they will be imposing a mask expectation/mandate or allowing parents to choose. Currently, our school district is imposing a mask expectation. I have a few questions tonight, and I do anticipate or expect a response from our board members. So my first question is, what is our current percent of infection rate with students and staff? What are those current percentages?
Ms. Foster, our public participation board policy does not require the board to address questions or concerns.
Okay, so on my form that I filled out to speak, there is in my email address and my phone number. So I will expect a response from a representative of the board within 24 hours of today's questions. So please make note of them.
That's understandable, and we can make arrangements for that to happen.
Wonderful. So I would like to know the current percentage rate of infected students and staff. I would like to know, as of September 12th, what those infections rates were. I would also like to know what the infection rates at the end of the school year were. And as many of us remember, the parents were educated weekly by our superintendent of staff that was quarantining due to exposure, staff that had been infected, students quarantining due to exposure, and then students infected. I would like to know why those emails have stopped, and I'd like to know when they will begin again. I would also like to know, since we are in a pandemic, prior to the pandemic, we have had immunocompromised students attending our school. So in the past, given the severity of such as the swine flu, the outbreaks of the general seasonal flu, pneumonia, and so forth, strep throat, anything that would cause a severe reaction in immunocompromised children, what are our mitigation efforts What have they been up until this point? I would also like to state and remind everybody that Judge Pratt's injunction or restraining order against the state of Iowa's legislature and governor is only that of a temporary order. There should have been a ruling today, and I have not had the privilege of seeing any press releases to whether or not that has been extended, which means tomorrow, if there hasn't been a press release, because it expires tonight at midnight, if there is no further ruling, then there is a ban on masks. So how are we going to redirect children that now have been indoctrinated with, you're keeping everyone safe, that no longer have to wear one without a religious or medical exemption? I also did a little research, and I found that the president of the Iowa State Education Association commented and said, "Today we are pleased that the courts continue, to recognize the importance of local control and allowing local school districts to make important decisions about health and safety of their students, employee, and school community." And at no point did he reference that now the school district has the right to impose mandates to protect those listed in a lawsuit that infringes on their civic rights to attend a public school in person. I would also like to pose a rhetorical question to everybody listening, and especially our board members. So we are imposing masks on children who do have I will rephrase that, excuse me. We are having an expectation, and children who have parents that can advocate them and medical doctors, they are excused from this participation. However, those same students have been cropped out of photos of classroom photos. So a group of children were allowed to take a photo, and a child at the end did not have a mask on. The school cropped that child out and only represented those students that had a mask on.
Amy,
And-
that's 5 minutes.
I don't believe it was.
Yeah, there's a timer right there that was on there
And when did my 5 minutes start?
when you started talking.
And can you confirm my start time, please?
No, but when you started talking, there's a clock here, and I hit it.
I'll let you wrap up your
Okay.
comments, Ms. Foster.
So here's what I want you to notice. These children are being cropped out of photos, required to stand in a box. A child not wearing a mask correctly was told by a staff member, a teacher in specific, that that child who is in elementary school is no longer making an adult feel safe. Students are being forced to take cloth masks upon entry to school. Even though they have an exemption on file, they are still forced to put a mask in their hand. A quote from a student: "I hate it here. Teachers keep staring me down and treating me like I killed someone." A child was sent to the principal's office daily for a week, and in those conversations with the principal, the child was told, "It doesn't matter, you have an exemption. That'll all change next week." So we are segregating children that have exemptions, and we are treating them as they are a second-class citizen. So what I am asking a question is, what is this board doing to ensure the mental welfare of children that range from 3 to 18 years old that attend our district that are being bullied, harassed, segregated, and ridiculed by adults in our district? Thank you.
And just as a point of clarification, Judge Pratt did issue a final ruling on Friday. Next, we have Shayla Roof.
Hello. Do I need to state my name and spell it?
No, we have it on the form, so that's fine.
All right, thank you. I would like to get started with saying that your actions are speaking louder than your words. I am here today regarding the mask expectations set in place on September 15th. First of all, I thought the purpose behind masking was for the health and well-being of all students and staff in our community to mitigate the transmission of COVID, not for political games with public institutions. The dust is not settled on this federal order which prompted your decision to change your course in masking. It is a temporary order against the law, not ending the law. We watched you, in haste, create an expectation without having all of your I's dotted and T's crossed in less than 24 hours. As this board stated at previous board meetings, it was implemented because your legal guidance suggested action needed to be taken after a federal judge's words about an Iowa law, not about mitigating the transmission of COVID. You are not doctors. You are not public health. You have overstepped your bounds as board members. You do not get to decide what is best for our children regarding their health and well-being. End the mask expectation today, as none of you have any right to force a medical device on students and staff. We all know the majority of staff and students are only wearing them due to an expectation to comply, not because they feel safer or healthier wearing masks. This is evidenced by an overwhelming majority of staff and students choosing not to wear them when they had a choice. This could be observed each day in the classroom and on school social media. The superintendent also stated that you all did not look at this data or take this into consideration when deciding to implement a new mask expectation. If this were a health-based decision, you would have looked at your own numbers on your own website about the positive case rate in the district and would have seen that as of October 8th, the positivity rate continues to be less than 1% of all student and staff populations. This rate has been the same rate prior to the expectation put into place. It has not changed. You would have looked holistically at the situation with data and research and how to implement these expectations and how implementing them would affect all staff and students, not just a select few. This is what West Burlington School District decided to do after they also re-implemented a mask expectation due to the federal judge's temporary order. They looked at actual data and rescinded their mask mandate effective this week. Why can't Council Bluffs School District do the same instead of repeating blanket legal statements when questions are asked about data and answering said questions are avoided? We as parents still have yet to see what the actual mask expectation is that was sent to teachers and staff. Your actions of avoidance of answering questions and not being transparent speak louder than your words in any email. I have some questions that I would like to be heard on public record regarding the mask expectation and implementation of it, since these questions were sent to the board prior to the meeting 2 weeks ago with no reply. These questions were instead forwarded to the superintendent, who also did not answer them. I am still waiting for answers. The questions are as follows. What has this school board and superintendent done to research and educate themselves regarding the effectiveness of masks in classroom settings while not utilizing them in other places of the school building? What information was looked at and what were the conclusions? When masks were a choice, what percentage of students and staff were actually wearing them? Does the school board only refer to the CDC when making decisions regarding COVID-19 and mask wearing? Multiple state and private agencies have shown contradicting data regarding the efficacy of mask wearing. Every source should be looked at when making expectations for an entire community of staff and students. Why would you create so much chaos by implementing an expectation that wasn't completely thought through or even run by teachers or staff to determine how this was going to be implemented realistically? Why do you think fear of a lawsuit is more important than parental and personal choice and the health and well-being of the students that you serve? Show us your sources of information for some transparency. Emails are not sources and will not cut it. You are not doing this about health. It is about a lawsuit, money, and compliance. You all have said as much in these previous meetings. In your last email regarding the update on masks, you chose not to be transparent about how your hasty decisions interrupted many children's school day on the 15th and continue to do so. You chose to exclude the instances where parents found out their children were being told to be put into tape boxes on the floor, or where they were being segregated from their peers, or told they had to go home for not following an arbitrary expectation. You poorly executed your hasty decision and refused to acknowledge this. Your Return to Learn plan specifically states that students should not be separated based on mask usage. There were none of these issues on the 14th because there was a choice for all. You have been derelict in your duties in creating a healthy and safe learning environment for all students in light of this expectation. You are operating outside the scope of your duties by taking away choice for parents, students, and staff. Because of this, I support immediate action to be taken to end this expectation today, as my child will not continue to be a pawn in your games. Thank you.
That concludes our public participation. Next up on the agenda is the superintendent's report. Dr. Murillo.
Thank you, Mr. LaFerla. At this time, I'd like to invite Dr. Vorthman to the podium. This evening, we'll be presenting in our academic student achievement report on the fall 2021 MAP results.
Good evening.
Good evening.
It's my pleasure tonight to provide the board with an update on our most recent administration of the NWEA MAP assessment. This is an assessment that our students take 3 times a year for all students in grades K through 11. And it provides us important information not only to make adjustments in our curriculum, but also make sure that we are meeting the needs of our students and helping students meet their individual goals on the MAP assessment. Before we begin tonight, I want to reference back why this data is important to us. As you recall, the board adopted 4 strategic goals in the summer of 2021. Goal number 1 stresses that we improve academic achievement. And the strategies that we have, along with the benchmarks to get that done, insist that we have 80% of our students scoring in the top 3 bands of the MAP assessment. That would be in the high, high average, and high categories by 2024. Second, we expect that 60% of our students will reach their individual growth targets by 2024. That is a stretch goal that we have already met once. We set it at 50%. As suggested by NWEA, and we met that goal, so we have stretched to 60%. And then lastly, we expect that 100% of our students will demonstrate at least some growth during the testing year. I would like to set a little bit of context before I provide kind of an overview of what we saw this last testing period. First and foremost, I'm sure it's not lost on the board that our students, our teachers, our families, are still searching for normal. Unfortunately, when we left in March of 2020, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, things have not returned to the night before as of yet. And those come with certain struggles. And I'm sure you're very much aware of the anxiety that our students feel, that our parents feel, and that our teachers feel every day as they try to work towards getting back to whatever will be normal in the future. I did want to provide an update on mathematics performance. We saw in our most recent testing period about a 0.7% increase in mathematics performance in terms of students that performed at the benchmark when we compared the fall of 2020 to the fall of 2021. And what this comparison really does is it gives us a good snapshot of what took place in the last academic year. So it takes into account where students started in the fall of last year and where they entered the fall of this year. What I did want to show the board tonight is a new chart that you haven't seen before that really, I think, puts into a bigger picture what our performance has looked like since we started taking the MAP assessment. And if you recall, we took our first MAP assessment in the spring of 2018. And in the spring of 2018, we had approximately 51% of our students that tested in those top 3 bands in mathematics. And as you recall, we test every single student. Our students who are gifted, our students from all of our ethnic subgroups, our students who have disabilities, who have learning goals, and our students who are English language learners. So this encompasses the entire population of our school district students in K through 11. And you'll note that at several points during the last several school years, I've cautioned the board that I was nervous that we were making such large incremental gains, sometimes 3 and 4% at a time, that those are not always sustainable. So you'll notice as we went through 2018 and into 2019, by the time we had gotten to the winter of 2020, we really had made about 6.5% improvement in a relatively short period of time. We had gotten to about 56% of our students meeting the benchmark. You'll notice that there's a blank right in the middle, and that is where we had the COVID shutdown. So there was no test that was administered during the spring of 2020. And then the next 4 points that are noted by stars, and will continue to be noted by stars, are all in pandemic tests. And the reason I'm going to denote them that way is because we know that the learning environments that our students have been learning in have not been what we had before the pandemic. So we have to acknowledge that it's different. And so if you look at where we ended in the winter of 2020 and where we came in the fall of 2020 and into this year's fall 21 test, you can see that that progress has been relatively flat. And we are continuing to see somewhat stagnant academic achievement in mathematics, very small gains as we go throughout the next testing period. So when you look at our individual grade levels, this chart shows a percentage of students who scored in those top 3 categories. I believe I've told the board in previous years, we administer this test in 3 different groups. There's a kindergarten and first grade test. That test is auditorily read to the students. So they put headphones on, the questions are read to them, and then they respond on the computer. We have an option of allowing second graders to take that test, or we can have our second graders take the intermediate elementary test, which they do 100% independently. We've chosen in the past several years to have our second grade students go ahead and take the upper elementary tests. So it's the first time in the fall of their second grade year that they have to independently take the tests without the headphones. And since we started doing that, what we see in the fall of second grade is we always see a precipitous dip in proficiency. And one of the reasons for that is the first time that students have to ride the bike without the training wheels. And what we do see is by the time they get into winter and fall and spring testing periods, they've made up the ground that they lost. They're more accustomed to taking that test on their own. They're more self-regulated when they're going through the test, and they're able to better navigate it. So you'll see in this chart this chart mirrors several that we've seen in previous years. We see very high academic performance in our kindergarten and first grade. We see that dip into second grade, and by the time they get into 4th and 5th grade, they're rebounding. There's a slight dip in 6th grade. It levels out in 7th and 8th grade, and then we see an uptick in our high school classes. What I also wanted to show was how this compared to the actual students' performance the previous fall. So the blue line shows where those students performed as a cohort in the fall of 2020. And what I want you to recognize here is the distance between the purple bar and the blue line. And what that shows is how much performance that group either gained or lost during the last academic year. And so what we can see is even though we have been learning during a pandemic, in most of our grade levels, especially from 3rd grade through 8th grade, you can see that those students outperformed where they performed the previous year, and that's encouraging. This is just a little bit different way of looking at that same information, but what it shows is all of the grade levels that are above the line shows that those cohorts grew and how much they grew, and the ones below the line show how much those declined from fall to fall. So you'll notice that we were very concerned last year about our second graders going into 3rd grade and our 3rd graders going into 4th grade. You can see that 4th grade class especially made up a tremendous amount of space, almost 14% improvement from last year to this year. This chart shows the percentage of students who met their individual growth targets. And as you recall, our goal is for 60% of our students to do that. You'll see that in our early elementary grades, the percentage of students was relatively low, but rebounds nicely as students get into upper elementary and then tapers off in middle school and high school. What's interesting is I also wanted to look at how that compared to the same students performing the previous academic year. So the blue line shows the percentage of students who met their growth targets in the fall of 2019, and from fall of 2019 to fall of 2020 versus our current fall 20 to fall 21. And what you'll notice again is the distance between the purple bar and the blue line shows how much either growth or regression that those students made. Last year was a difficult year, but you can see in almost every single grade level, students made a tremendous amount of growth in meeting their individual growth targets during our previous academic year in mathematics. And lastly, this chart shows the percentage of students who made any growth. And this is very typical for what we've been seeing and what NWEA predicts we will see. As you recall, this test has what's called a RIT scale. It's a continuous scale of points all the way from kindergarten all the way up through 11th grade. And what that does is it allows students to set individual targets. And as students progress in grades, the amount of growth that they can make gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. So where a first grader may have a RIT goal of 4 points between testing periods, a junior may have a RIT goal of 1 point for the entire year. And that's just because the scale is spread out across 11 different grades. This chart shows by subgroups our student performance of students performing at the benchmark. You'll notice that our highest performing ethnic subgroup currently is students who are Asian, but you'll also notice that it's relatively flat across the other subgroups. When you lay over top of that the percentage of students in each of these subgroups that are meeting their growth targets, as identified by the blue line, you'll see that regardless of the subgroup that our students are in, that line is relatively flat, meaning that all of our students can meet their individual growth targets, regardless of the subgroup that they identify in. The story in reading was a little bit different than mathematics. We lost about 2.5% from fall of 2020 to fall of 2021. And unfortunately, this isn't as good of data as I was hoping to report to the board tonight, but I'm not 100% surprised. As you recall, our reading performance over the past several years had been significantly higher than our mathematics performance. Where we were climbing towards 60% proficiency in mathematics, we started out at 60% proficiency in reading. And it was a very, very tough year last year, especially for students who had lost and had unfinished learning in very key grade levels, where they were just starting to put together the important foundational reading skills. And we acknowledged that very early on in the pandemic that was going to be a very steep climb for us. So we put things in place right out at the outset of the pandemic. We repaced curriculum to make sure that students had additional attempts and at-bats to make sure that they were able to get important skills that they had missed. We prioritized intervention in reading, especially at the primary grades, especially grade 2 last year, where students had missed additional opportunities. And we opened up wide availability of summer reading program this year for any student who wanted to participate. And all of those were really good things, but we still have work to do when it comes to reading. This chart, just like the mathematics chart, shows you where we started in the spring of 2018 in terms of reading. That was about 57% of our students were scoring in those top 3 categories when we started. We had raised that to almost 64% before we closed for the pandemic. And you'll notice that when we came back in the fall of 2020, our performance was relatively flat. But when you look at what happened last year and the ground that we had to make up, we didn't see some declines. And so when you look at from spring to fall, we're starting to climb out of that hole. But we have some more work to do to get back to where we were in the winter of 2020. This chart, like I said before, shows the percentage of students who are meeting the benchmark from kindergarten all the way up through grade 11. And it looks somewhat similar in definition to the mathematics. You'll see that second grade continues to drop off as they kind of progress into that independence of that test. But by the time they're in 3rd and 4th grade, they make a nice exit. They get into middle school. You'll notice this year is one of the first years I can ever remember reporting that we did not see a dip in sixth grade reading. So something went right in the last year. So that certainly is a celebration. And we maintained most of our momentum in high school. 9th, 10th, and 11th grade were a strong performance at above 60%. Interesting, when we lay out on top of that the fall 2020 versus the fall 21, you'll see that there's not as many grade levels that outperform the previous year. Again, showing us that reading was more difficult during the pandemic, making up that performance than was the mathematics. Again, this chart shows cohorts that are above the line, shows that they made more growth, and those that are below the line, they didn't make as much growth, hence why we had about a 2.5% decrease in proficiency. This chart shows the percentage of students who met their individual growth targets during the previous academic year from fall 2020 to fall 2021. You'll see that our highest performance was third grade, and that's a victory. That shows us that where we doubled down and we provided additional support, we did get some return on our investment there. That was the highest grade level. At about 62% of those students met their individual growth targets. When you put on top of that what it looked like pre-pandemic to post-pandemic, you can see where third grade really outperformed where they were during the pandemic, the shutdown, and then it tapered off once we get into middle school and high school. This chart shows the percentage of students who made any growth. Our performance continues to be the highest in our elementary grades, but our secondaries are posting pretty solid gains at above 50% in most grade levels. This chart shows a percentage of students by subgroup that met the benchmark, and you can see once again our highest performing subgroup continues to be students who are Asian, but the distance between our subgroups is relatively flat. When you lay across that the percentage of those students who are meeting their individual growth targets, it is very flat with the exception of one dip, which is in Native American, which unfortunately for us is a very, very small subgroup, less than 20 in the entire school district. So when there is one or two, it makes a tremendous difference. So we kind of take that data point with some caution when we have such a small n size. So as I wrap up tonight, I just want to kind of remind everyone where we are at, our present setting. As you're going to hear about in a little bit later presentation tonight, the mental health, the social emotional well-being of our students, we know is certainly still fragile. And there certainly is a lot of fatigue that everyone feels right now that we've been feeling since March of 2020. And unfortunately, we can't put our finger on the calendar on the day that we're going to be able to say, hey, this is all over and we're going to be able to get back to normal. But until then, we have to respond with empathy and grace and know that people are doing the best that they can every day. Secondly, as I said earlier in our spring presentation, one of the things that this has really driven home for us is that attendance is critically important to academic achievement. And when we look at the most overriding factor, regardless of subgroup or socioeconomic status or disability, the one thing that matters more than anything is attendance. And our students that came to school or that were able to be in school at least 95% of the days performed exceptionally better than the students who were not. And that's why you saw a renewed and intensive focus this year that we rolled out on the importance of Diploma Plus One and being on track for Diploma Plus One. And so we are really dialing in those things that are the highest levers, those things that we know that are going to have the biggest difference in making sure that our students are successful, not only in the foundational years in elementary, but those formative years in middle school and those decisional years in high school, to make sure that they have that high school diploma and second piece of paper. That's that they're proficient on the MAP assessment, that we get to that 80% mark, that they're in attendance at least 95% of the days, and that those key gatekeepers of math and English language arts, that they're performing at a C or better. We know if we can get students to those areas, and we progress monitor, we track, and we identify students who need additional help, that we can get them that second credential, and that we can get them that high school diploma so that they can have value add in our workforce or in post-secondary. So as we look forward to next steps, we're going to, you'll hear a renewed focus on the importance of on track to Diploma Plus One. I believe next month our principals will be sharing with you their individual school improvement plans and how they're using the on-track data to guide the strategies that they're employing in their buildings. I already kind of talked about some of the realignment that we did and the importance of implementing our curriculum with fidelity to making sure that students have access to a guaranteed and viable curriculum regardless of the school or classroom that they're in. And that we are trying to leverage a updated multi-tiered system of support as we continue to kind of build the plane as we fly it to make sure that we identify when students are struggling, and we use at elementary, middle school, and high school those periods of time that are designated to intervene and differentiate instruction with students who need an additional dose along with the core instruction. And then lastly, we are committed to bolstering our academic supports, both social and emotional. And you'll hear more about those tonight from Mr. Hamilton and Ms. Zimmer. And with that, I would welcome any questions the board might have tonight.
Thank you for all the information. The fourth grade with such good gains, seemingly on both sides. What is it that we're doing differently there? Or what did we do differently there? I guess
So last year's third grade was the second grade and third grade last year were the classes that we were worried the
down
most
much.
about.
Yeah.
And so what you heard earlier in previous presentations, that's where we deployed much of our resources in terms of intervention. That's where buildings identified where they needed additional supports. That's where we had changes to curriculum to make sure that we went back and picked up those skills from the unfinished semester, basically. And I think it was just a renewed effort. Also, when you have a huge loss, it's easier to make a large gain.
what has, have we gotten feedback from students at all about that? I'm just curious, how intense was it? Was it certain groups it's a substantial gain, so.
It's an unsustainable gain.
Right.
When I see gains of anything more than 1.5% to 2%, I get anxious because that's not sustainable. So don't expect to see 14% in winter. That's what I'm
Yeah.
saying.
Do the grade 10, 11 math, is some of a disconnect from the desire to do MAP testing? Or
We
just
certainly
it's
hear that.
significantly off, so.
We certainly hear that. Testing participation at our high schools is the lowest in our school district. Testing participation in our elementaries is wonderful. Always 98, 99, 100%. Testing in our middle schools is usually around 95%. In our high schools, it's less than that.
Dr. Worthman, we implemented MAP, as you mentioned, in the spring of 2018, and that was a pilot cohort that time, wasn't it? Or was that full implementation?
Winter was actually our pilot cohort.
Okay.
The spring was our first full-blown, everybody took it K-11.
Okay. And I know that there are robust tools for, how teachers can utilize in MAP for differentiating and grouping children.
Sure.
And I'm just wondering, we've had a couple of years now, and what is your feeling on, how that might be happening in classrooms and how supported teachers feel with utilizing those tools and understanding the resources?
Yeah. I think first and foremost, nothing takes the place of our curriculum. That's our most important vehicle that we have for raising.
You have driven that home to me. I get that now.
But in addition to that, the MAP and the learning continuum that goes along with it that you're referring to is a great tool for teachers to have additional data to say, what is the student ready for next? Based on their current level of performance, what should we be moving on to next? What skill, what groups of skills? And I think when you couple that with the individual data that they get in their classrooms, whether they're using formative assessments in their classrooms or they're using assessments from our instructional materials, they put those two things together and they're able to make really strong informed decisions about how to pull small groups of students or who needs additional support in a math pass class or a literacy pass class at our secondary schools. And what we have seen is when we offer professional development on the learning continuum at Summer Academy, the first year there weren't a lot of people that were all that interested in it. This year we offered 4 sessions on it because we had a lot more interest. So I think that there continues to be more curiosity about how we can utilize it in our instructional settings, and we'll continue to work with teachers who want to use it more effectively in their classes.
Thank you. Any other questions?
How has pacing either helped or deterred with getting the curriculum to the students?
It's incredibly difficult, especially last year when we had to compact some items, we had to prioritize others. There were things that we liked to do that we didn't do because they weren't 100% essential, because we knew they were going to be covered in another unit or they were going to be covered in another grade. And so I just had a conversation with the principal this afternoon, and they're struggling with how do we make sure that we continue to provide rich access to core instruction for all kids, but at the same time make sure that we're filling those gaps that kids are coming in with. Because we are going to continue to see gaps for many, many years to come. And our goal is to minimize each year the number of students that have those gaps. I would not be telling you the truth if I said that everything's back to normal and we're all good. We're not going to be in a great situation for many years to come because we have an entire school grade levels, all grade levels, that had no access or limited access to instruction for almost 12 weeks. And that's about a third of our school year. And so we did the very best we could during last school year to try to make up those things, but you can't stop what they're supposed to learn in 3rd grade. Because if you do that, then they get to 4th grade and they're not ready. So what we had to do was compact as much as we could at that time, make sure we focused on essential skills that we knew were prerequisites for future learning, and continue on with core instruction. And now we're going to chip away year after year after year of making sure that if students have specific individual skill deficits, that we address them.
So the grade 7 reading growth, meeting their growth target, was that a combination of that prior year's grade 6 being kind of poor performing in general, and then throwing that lack of 12 weeks on top of that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
We had actually a really great presentation from Principal Naughton that talked about how they're trying to address that at the school level. And I don't know if there's any of that could be shared, or that could be shared that you could share right now. Just in addition to this, I think it's phenomenal what we're doing to try to identify that and provide the supports needed to help those students.
Yeah, I won't steal any of Mr. Naughton's thunder. We have, they have a plan in their building that you heard about today. You'll hear about the other 15 here in another month or so. And the goal really, I think you articulated it very well, is to make sure that we take the kids where they're at and that they don't fall any further behind, but we bolster them as they move forward.
And do we ever track, as a larger group, just those who aren't at our attendance desired norm, I guess, and those who are and how they perform through growth and all this?
Absolutely. If you recall back to the spring, I kind of dove deep into that. What we did is we looked at the students who were chronically absent versus students who are not chronically absent. And there wasn't a tremendous amount of difference between those two groups at elementary school. If you remember, that I showed you a chart. By the time you get to middle school, it starts to really kind of hit you in the face that there's a difference in academic achievement between the two. And by the time you get to high school, it's red hot. The difference in student achievement in our high schools between students who are chronically absent and are not chronically absent is night and day.
Any other questions from the board? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Borthman. At this time, we'll do our informational presentation, and this evening, I'm going to invite Mr. Hamilton to the podium. We'll be learning about our social and emotional learning and curriculum, and we have new curriculum this year that has been rolled out to our elementary and secondary schools. So, Mr. Hamilton, are you looking for someone?
No, I was just making sure that everything worked technology-wise.
It looks
So-
good.
So I appreciate you having me. Thank you, Dr. Murillo, on board. With me tonight, I have Carrie Zimmer, who is our social and emotional wellness coordinator. And really, I want to showcase the work tonight that she has been doing. She has really taken the lead on this. She is in her second year in this role. The work that she's done around social emotional learning and the work around trauma has really been tremendous. So I'm going to speak just a little bit, and she's really going to give you the nitty-gritty of what's been going on. So before we start, I do want to remind, I know we have some newer board members who may not know everything that we have done the last few years. So really our goal is to ensure that each student is supported and connected. This work started for us in 2019 when we came and we started doing the work with becoming a trauma-informed school district. That year, we really spent time working with understanding what trauma is, understanding how it affects kids, understanding what we as staff members need to do to support those kids. Last school year, we got into Classroom 180. The Classroom 180 piece was really gave us a chance to evaluate the work that we've done in trauma. It gave us a rubric for us to use to be able to go into our schools to see how our schools are doing, to see where our strengths were, and then to also see where our weaknesses were to see where we could do a little better. That work is not ending. That work continues. Our schools are still doing professional development around Classroom 180. Carrie's doing CBUs with new staff to bring them on board and teach them about trauma. So that is a continuance of work. That work is really working with our staff members to teach them how to work with kids who have trauma or to just work with kids to build relationships. So we thought our natural progression was to go into how do we work with kids so they can learn to stay regulated, learn about their own emotions and what they can do to, well, I don't want to steal Carrie's thunder. So the next part was to look at our social emotional learning. So last school year, we created our, out of the MTSS process, the multi-tiered systems of support, there's a universal tier for social emotional learning. So we created our social emotional learning teams. So we looked at elementary, middle school, and high school. We had representatives from the district and the schools because we didn't want to lose the school's voice in this. Those teams looked at the Iowa SEL curriculum, which had just been created last school year. And then we reviewed a bunch of different curriculum, and we selected a curriculum that met the standards from Iowa, that met what we felt were our students' needs and fit into the time allotment that we had available. Because we all know there's only so much time within the day. So it really fit into where we wanted it to fit into our schools. And with that, I'm going to let Carrie tell you our next steps.
Thanks, Tim. So before we take a deeper look at the curriculum that was selected, I want to take a step back and really talk about what SEL is and what that means. And I know that I'm here to talk about curriculum, but I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. So what I'm sharing with you is an image that comes to us from CASEL. CASEL is the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. This is really a collaborative, that's a nationwide collaborative that puts together what social and emotional learning looks like, and it's actually what the state of Iowa referenced when they put together their state standards. And you'll see tonight that really CASEL is our guidance in most of the decisions that we make when it comes to social and emotional learning. So I'm using their image tonight to walk through what social and emotional learning is. So the definition of social and emotional learning is that it's a process. And it's a process where students learn and apply knowledge, skills, develop identities, emotions, goals, and show empathy. They create relationships and they make thoughtful decisions. So how this happens, it's not in a silo. So it starts on the outside with our communities. So whether it's a student playing soccer on a soccer field, or perhaps they're going to work, that in their community, they're learning social and emotional skills with those that they interact with in their community. The next circle in is with their families and caregivers. So when our students are at home with their families and with their caregivers, interacting with their siblings, they're learning social and emotional skills. The next circle in is within our schools. So within the walls of the schools, when students enter, they enter a climate, a culture in that building, and how they interact with adults, how they interact with each other, they're learning skills. And then lastly, the inner circle is in that classroom. So in the classroom, we see intentional social and emotional learning. That's where the curriculum's applied. But we also see social and emotional learning happening when they're learning about math, or they're working on a book report, and they're interacting with a peer and having a discussion. So all of these components is where they're learning social and emotional skills. And then on the inside of the circle, you see the 5 competencies of social and emotional learning. So the first 2 in orange are self-awareness and self-management. So that's about the individual, where they're learning how to manage their behaviors, identify their emotions. The next 2 in green are social awareness and relationship skills. So those are interpersonal skills, that when you're interacting with another person, when you're identifying how they may feel, putting yourself in their shoes, developing what empathy looks like and feels like. And then lastly, responsible decision making. So when it comes to make a decision, do I get up out of bed and get to school on time today? Making those personal decisions, that's the responsible decision making. So those are the 5 pieces of the 5 competencies that build social and emotional learning. And so with that, I want to move on to what this curriculum looks like. And I'm going to start with the elementary schools. So in the elementary, the curriculum that was selected is called Move This World. It's a research and evidence-based curriculum. Again, it's built around the CASTLE principles. It is 5 to 8 minute videos, lessons, and they take place in classrooms in the elementary buildings 3 to 5 times per week. They have a pacing guide that lays out each week for them what the videos are that will be played. Teachers do have the ability that if they need to use an additional intervention, they can replay a video. Sometimes the videos move pretty fast for the little kids, so you might have to replay it for them to really start to build repetition. And they are interactive and movement-based videos. So we see students getting up out of their chairs and moving. And we know that learning really occurs when they get their body movement going with it. And it provides additional resources for interventions. Perhaps during a transition period, there's an opportunity where they can reset a classroom with some of the interventions. So I wanted to take the opportunity to show you what this looks like. And what I'm going to show you tonight is Elliot, and Elliot is doing a video on self-management. And what students are learning are the 10 emojis. And this common language that is being built in the elementary buildings is 10 emojis are how students might manage their emotions or manage a big feeling that they're having. And students start to identify which of the 10 emojis works well for them. So I'm going to show you this video, and then we'll talk a little bit about this.
Feel free to stand up and move along if you want to.
And what you're seeing looks a little bit different for the teachers who use this in their classrooms. I just have an administrator view, so it looks a little bit different, but the content's here.
Hi, I'm Elliot. It's time to practice our 10 emojis. Emojis are things we do to manage our emotions. We practice our emojis through movements and gestures to remember different ways to calm down when we feel really angry, sad, scared, or sometimes even excited. This helps connect what we feel in our bodies with what we understand in our brains. I will say the emoji, and then let's all do the movements together. Ready? Here we go. Breathe 5 times. Count to 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Smile, give a hug or a fist bump. Smile, give a hug or fist bump. Walk away quietly. Walk away quietly. Drink a glass of water. Drink a glass of water. Meet in the middle. Meet in the middle. Put yourself in someone else's shoes. Put yourself in someone else's shoes. Active listening.
So we
Active
kind of
listening.
get the idea, right? It's a little bit sing-song, but this is for the early elementary where they're moving, and you can see students in the building saying, oh, drink a glass of water. And you're like, really? But it catches on, and that's what they use. That's the strategy that they pick up on to help navigate a challenging feeling that they're having. And it can be an interpersonal feeling, or maybe they're feeling just a little dysregulated in their chair and need to take a moment. So next I'll show you the second curriculum that was selected for secondary. So the second is called Habitudes. And Habitudes provides curriculum for the middle school and for the high school, but it's a different set of images. So Habitudes is, again, research-based and evidence-based. The lessons are about 20 minutes. They are designed to take place during the advisement period and provide additional resources for digging a little deeper in additional interventions. And again, it's image-based learning. So it's the image that sticks with them and it begins to create questions and conversation. So there are different images from the middle school and the high school. And so what I'm going to show you tonight is the example that high school students see, and it's the first lesson, and it's called the iceberg. So I want to set this up a little bit for you. The core competency that students are learning with this is responsible decision making, and secondary is self-awareness. So we all know the image of an iceberg, right? Where the majority of the iceberg sits below the water, and then just about 10% sits above the water. So if you think about this from a leadership perspective, that if you think of leadership as the iceberg, the top 10% out of the water is leadership skills that are learned. And the bottom, below the water, 90%, is character and decisions that are made. So that's how this is set up for students. And it's set up where they watch a clip of the Titanic. And if you really think about the Titanic, what sunk the Titanic? An iceberg, but it was also the people who were steering the ship who thought that the iceberg was unsinkable. So they felt like their ship couldn't be sunk. And it was the bottom 90% that they couldn't see, and it was their character and decision making that sunk the ship. So that's what sets this image up, and I'm going to show you what this curriculum looks like. So before I play this video for you, what's nice for teachers is that this presentation deck that I'm showing you here is the presentation deck that teachers can play. All of the questions, the conversation starters, the follow-up questions, how you can dig deeper is all set up in the presentation deck for teachers to use, including the video that I'm going to show you. So it's very user-friendly and really has minimal setup time for teachers where they don't have to spend a lot of time preparing.
The iceberg is the first rule of leadership. It's a picture of how genuine influence works in relationships. The 10% that lies above the waterline represents my skill. It's visible, people can see it. But the 90% that lies below the surface represents my character. It's hidden to the naked eye at first. It represents, however, the majority of my influence. When people think about leadership, they often jump into the topic of skills or talent. But real leadership doesn't start there. I believe lasting leaders are built from the inside out. It's first a matter of self-leadership, learning to lead myself before I try to lead anybody else. That's the bulk of our leadership. Other skills come later. Now, I don't know about you, but I can't see a picture of an iceberg without thinking about that tragic story of the Titanic. Do you remember that story? The Titanic was called the unsinkable ship. The captain even stood on the deck of that ship before it launched and said, "Even God can't sink this ship." By the way, not a good thing to say just before you take off into the deep waters of the Atlantic Ocean. But it was sunk by an iceberg. That's the story we all know. The story you may not know is this. The iceberg was not a surprise. On April 14th, 1912, the Titanic received 5 explicit warnings about icebergs. No one paid any attention. And when the 6th and final warning came in the wee hours of April 15th, the telegraph operator wired back 4 simple words. "Shut up, I'm busy." Those were the last words he transmitted before hitting the iceberg. And 30 minutes later, the ship had hit and began to go down. Hundreds of people unnecessarily lost their lives due to people not paying attention. They assumed they were unsinkable. Far too often, this story illustrates our lives. How many times do we get warnings from friends, parents, teammates, teachers, or employers about our character flaws? And how many times do we respond with the attitude, "Shut up, I'm busy. I've got too many things going on in my life." And so we fail to notice the small but real holes in our character. In fact, we say,
So that gives you a flavor of what the students are seeing in their classrooms. And that image of the iceberg, so we have posters in the schools, and when students have done the lesson with the iceberg and they see the iceberg, it becomes, again, that common language that remember the iceberg, and we're trying to develop leadership skills here. So again, that was a high school image, and I think leadership is really an important quality that we're trying to teach our high school students as they're preparing for the workforce and what's beyond. So once we had the curriculum selected, it became time to figure out how do we get this in the hands of teachers so they feel really prepared to launch this new curriculum for the school year. We knew we had to be ready for the fall. So it started with the lead teams. We had 2 to 3 staff members from each building attend a training this summer where they learned how to be the leaders in their building on the curriculum. They learned how to be the support for the teachers in the building, and we worked together to get through that training. The next was the Summer Academy. So the Summer Academy, we brought in Joe Beckman, who was our keynote speaker, and he really talked about building human connections and relationships, which really aligns with our mission with social and emotional learning. And then we provided workshops. The workshops were mandatory for all teachers to attend, whether they attended during the Summer Academy or on their first contract day back. So they all attended, they were all trained during that time period. And what we know is that getting a big lift like this up off the ground doesn't just happen without a lot of support. And so our teaching and learning department really played a big role in giving us the time and space to do this at Summer Academy and to be the early bird session that we were allowed to be. And it was with that support for time and space that we were able to do this. And it also demonstrates how important we all know this work really is.
So with that, we'll talk a little bit about next steps or the steps moving forward. So what we'll continue to do is this is being implemented. It started this school year. The secondary schools are just starting their second, third lessons. The elementary schools have been working on it since school started. So the Student Family Services Department will continue to support schools. We're able to monitor and see which teachers are using it, how many lessons they've been able to do, and we provide that information to the administrators within the building just so they can see how it's going within their building and how many lessons are getting done. And right now, we've talked in the past about the panorama survey. So right now is actually the window that the panorama survey is open. We've extended that down to third grade. So now we're looking at third through 12th grade. And what that is, for those of you who are new, is that's where students take a survey that really they're telling us how they feel they are with their own social and emotional skills. So that survey is open. We should be getting those results here within it closes the end of next week. So a couple weeks after that, we'll be getting those results and we'll be able to share those with you. That's one of our data points as far as goal 4. We also included in that survey a question about how they like school, which is another data point. So this is a very important survey. And then the question about if they have a caring adult in their building. So there's a few questions on there that we're really looking at to see how students tell us how they're feeling within the school. And then we will continue to evaluate, not just looking at that survey, but looking at the curriculum in general. This is new to us. We've just been using it a few weeks. We'll continue to look at it and see, is it making a difference? Do kids, are they able to regulate their emotions? Are we seeing less, just even looking at the data, are we seeing less referrals for behavior? And those types of things, are kids being able to stay regulated? Because really that's what it's all about, is we want kids to be able to succeed and be successful in classrooms. So with that, Carrie and I will take any questions that you might have.
Yeah, I have a question on I saw there was, talked about parent and guardian logins on the Move It, or yeah. What is that? What are they jumping in, seeing the exact same content? Is it growth a child's making? What does that mean?
I'll answer. We haven't shared a lot of those yet because we're just getting new to us using it. We're going to be sharing more information after they take the SEL survey with parents to let them know more about the curriculum. And then that's when they'll get more opportunities to do that. But Carrie, what does that, it doesn't show the exact curriculum, but go ahead.
No, but it aligns with it. The parent videos, the parent information really gives information about what the students are learning and explains, for example, the 10 emojis, what they are, so that parents can have similar conversations or follow-up conversations at home.
As a parent, does that change? Like if I go in there, is it, as it's laid out, it rolls out into something I can see? Do I see all the content right off the bat? What does that look like?
All the content's available.
Okay. And then at the high school level, it looked like there's not that, but you can get printouts, or how does that?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So at the high school and middle school levels with Habitudes, there are optional student worksheets that if the teacher wants to print them out and have students follow along on the worksheets. They also have parent letters that are specific to that image that they're working on. And again, that's really up at the building level if they want to use that, or if it, or how that gets implemented.
Okay. Right.
But it's a letter for each specific habitude.
Each content.
It's tailored.
Yeah, and then the nice thing about the panorama survey, the results that go out, is that actually gives some information too about how students score and how what families can do to help bolster their scores as well. So there'll be some information on that as well.
Okay.
Any other questions from the board? Thank you.
Thank you both.
Thank you. And that concludes the superintendent's report.
Thank you, Dr. Murillo. We have one resolution this evening. Concrete bids for Carter Lake and College View Elementary parking lots. Is there a motion?
Move to approve McGill Restoration's bid in the amount of $174,450 for concrete parking lot, sidewalk, and curb repairs at Carter Lake and College View Elementary Schools.
Second.
Thank you. I have a motion and a second. Any discussion on these two items?
This should say work starts, I'm guessing soon. It says October. Work finishes by, is there a deadline I didn't see in there?
We're hoping to get it done by the middle of November.
there anything else, Troy?
No.
Other questions? Discussion? Mr. Wilson, please call the roll.
Dr. Ogres?
Yes.
Mr. Arthur?
Yes.
Mr. Kazire?
Yes.
Ms. Hudak?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Ms. Hardeman?
Yes.
Mr. LaFurla?
Yes, the motion carries. That concludes our business. We are adjourned.